Tom, we're in a slightly different situation today. Our normal studio space is under construction. They're doing renovations on the building, and we can't be there today. So we thought we'd give something a little different.
You've got some nice digs there, Dave. It kind of looks like you're sitting at a bar.
You know what? I'll bring the vino to Vino Veritas Society. How's that? I have my whole home bar sitting behind me. I'm sitting in my house. You're in your office. This was the quietest place I thought we could do it.
Yep.
I did want to point out this was a gift from actually one of our other guardians in our office. For those who can see this, I have a bottle of Guardian bourbon, sort of appropriate for the Vino Veritas Society.
That's very fitting.
It's a little distillery down in Colorado Springs. So
is it good? Is it good?
A nice gift.
Here's the question that's on everybody's mind, Dave. Is it good bourbon?
You know, you and I have talked a lot about our different styles in Scotch.
Yep.
We also have different styles, I think, in whiskey. And I think you might actually like this a little bit more than I do. It's a little more peaty than most whiskeys that I like, most bourbons that I like. What I really like is the Michter's sitting next to it. Everybody knows that's my favorite. I think, and we even have a bottle in our normal studio. We have a bottle of Michter's Rye, which is my absolute favorite. But I'm a rye drinker. Have we told the story about Michter's before on a podcast?
I don't know that we did. I sort of think maybe you did, but it was a long time ago. And we have many more listeners now. Tell the story. What is Michter's? Why do we have that back there?
Michter's. I'm gonna grab the bottle because I want to show off a couple things. Michter's was their tagline is the whiskey that kept Washington's armies warm. If you look on the bottle, it says established 1753, and on the top of the bottle it says US 1. So there's two interesting things, and it actually gets into a whole conversation about bureaucracy and licensing and everything else that we could go down. But Michter's was the distillery in Kentucky that was supplying the barrels of whiskey to the Revolutionary War soldiers in 1775 and 1776. And when Prohibition started, there were a couple guys like you and I who just loved the history and everything else, and they said, we can't let this distillery go down. So they kept it in working condition throughout Prohibition, under the belief that one day Prohibition would end.
For our listeners who don't remember, that was that period throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. Prohibition ended, if I recall, I think 1933.
Okay. You know those dates, but the idea was they wanted to keep this going. So what happened was the minute Prohibition was ended, the minute that Congress ended Prohibition, which we've talked about was the one legal prohibition that has ever been done because they did it through the legislative process.
They actually passed a constitutional amendment to prohibit the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol. Here's a curious feature, the 18th Amendment. That's what launched Prohibition. And I want to encourage our listeners to go pull up the Constitution, look at the 18th Amendment. It prohibits the manufacture, the sale, and the transportation of alcohol. It doesn't prohibit the drinking of alcohol. So even under the 18th Amendment, you can drink it, right. You just can't make it, sell it, or transport it.
and that's when a lot of people just said, well, just don't get caught. And that's when you got into moonshining, and there's a whole fascinating history there that one day we should go down the history of the moonshine runners, and it was called moonshine because they'd make it at the moonshine, and then speakeasy obviously. But they said a lot more people drank during Prohibition than post-Prohibition. Or pre-Prohibition.
Rates of alcoholism went up during Prohibition, which is a great lesson for anybody who sees a problem in the world. They see some kind of behavior that they don't like, that they think is wrong, and they get the idea, let's just pass a law. That'll solve the problem. Prohibition is a great lesson in how wrong thinking that is.
Right. So Michter's, just to finish the story, Michter's, these guys like you and I decide to buy the land. They keep the land in working order. They keep all the stills and everything else ready to go. and the minute prohibition ends, was that the 20, what amendment was that? The 18th created prohibition.
It would have been the 22nd Amendment.
22nd. So 22nd Amendment passes. They are ready to go. They had seen this coming through Congress. They are ready to go. And that's why it says US 1 on top of that bottle, because they have the very first liquor distribution license post-prohibition. So they have license number 1 for distributing whiskey in the United States. And it's kind of fitting that license, even though, I mean, look, we don't like licenses. We have all these issues with licenses, but it's fitting that the one that was George Washington's favorite, the one that
right.
helped Washington's armies, got the first distribution license after Prohibition. And the guys who own it have just they've kept it private, and they've just improved it and improved it. I think it's, for the money, one of the best whiskeys on the market.
I have to correct myself. I'm sitting here thinking the 18th Amendment launched Prohibition. The 19th Amendment was issued in women's suffrage. States could not restrict women from voting, so it would have been the 20th Amendment. 20th or 21st?
Oh, was it the 20th?
Not the 21st or 22nd. Yeah, I was confused about that. Dave, I want to talk today a little bit about. It's a big subject. It's an important subject. It kind of seems abstract, and yet it's one of the most relevant, useful concepts there is, and that's the idea of prudence or practical wisdom. It's a big theme in the case study for September, which sort of builds off of just the terrible debacle that we have seen in Afghanistan, this withdrawal, which seems to be so unwise, so foolish, so hurtful in so many ways, hurting not just Afghanis, right, but even United States citizens over there who are stuck, who can't get to the airport, they can't get out of Afghanistan. It's sort of a model of what prudence or practical wisdom is not. And so it's a big theme in our case study. And of course, everyone who's a member of an actual chapter, they'll be talking about that when they go to their chapter meetings. But I want to remind all of our digital subscribers, you have access to the monthly case studies as well. And I think you'll enjoy this one. It's a little different. It has something of an edge on it. It's kind of challenging, and a whole lot of research went into creating this case study. So I encourage all of our subscribers to go take a look at it.
Tom, we should clarify that this time it really is, we're taking a totally different approach to the case study this month, and we're looking forward to some of the feedback we get from our guardians, our poor Richards, and even some of the subscribers. We're not going to do a video this month with the case study. The case study is going to be this essay that you wrote that really takes a deep look into the whole approach to Afghanistan and the military in general, and understanding the progressive influence on the military. But we didn't do it with a video. We're not accompanying it with a video. We're not sitting here this month saying, here's what the founders said and here's how you should think. Instead, we're challenging everybody to start to think more like the founders, like we've talked about in the past. We've given the principles, the virtues and the precepts. Now it's time to take those and use prudence to apply them.
It's a challenge. Both things. Prudence in itself, just as an abstract idea, can be challenging. And this particular subject, Afghanistan, the withdrawal, because it's hard to talk about, because it means we're talking about the military. And here's just the hard, honest truth about the United States military today. There are large numbers of wonderful, patriotic, freedom-loving fellow citizens who are serving in the military in all kinds of capacities. And they go in because they love their country, they want to protect freedom, they want to protect their fellow citizens from foreign threats. And many of them do, and some of them risk. Sometimes they risk everything, and they give everything in this service to their country. So
Yeah.
So on the one hand, the military is this source of just tremendous sacrifice and work and seriousness. It's the right kind of patriotic spirit that you find throughout the military, and at the same time, at the top. And here I'm going to use a word that we've talked about at the Vino Veritas Society, and this is a very proper context: the leadership of the United States military today, the top brass, the longtime bureaucrats who are working at the Pentagon and the Department of Defense. They have the Department of Defense in many ways has become a progressive organization. I want to remind people here of just the basic premise of progressivism. It is that the modern world is far too complex, way too complicated for ordinary people to make their own decisions. The ordinary person, you're too stupid. You're just not smart enough. You don't have enough expertise to make decisions about what kind of medicines you should take and what kind of foods you should eat and what kind of curriculum should be in your kid's school and how foreign policy should be handled, how to respond to foreign threats. You're not smart enough to know that. We need experts, we need scientists, we need bureaucrats in government agencies figuring things out. That's the premise of progressivism. And now take that and look at the modern Department of Defense. That's what it has become. It has become this bureau. I mean, there are almost 30,000 bureaucrats who work in the Pentagon alone, and that's just one piece of the Department of Defense, right? And that whole premise is you ordinary citizens don't bother yourself thinking about important questions like war and peace and foreign policies. We're the experts. We're going to figure this out. And as the Department of Defense has become increasingly progressive, increasingly bureaucratic in recent decades, what have the results been? The results have been one endless war after another after another. Sort of the I almost want to call it the Vietnamization of American foreign policy and war making ever, right? They all turn into Vietnams one way or another, and certainly that is the case in Afghanistan right now.
Well, what's really interesting about what you were just saying is that it wasn't only the fact that it's become a progressive bureaucratic body, but it's these progressives are people who are studying textbooks, who are spending time at Harvard or Yale or Columbia or Princeton. They're not even, I mean, most of the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, these aren't people who have studied war. These aren't people who have studied and participated and are putting their lives on the line. These are people who have read books about international affairs at these very progressive institutions and have somehow decided that they are most capable of actually executing a plan, when in reality, what we saw from Vietnam and Korea and now Afghanistan is there really is rarely a plan. They have so many other things that they're trying to account for, including their own welfare, that they don't really get anything effective done in these cases, which interestingly is, I mean, if you ask most people, when was the last time we won a war?
Right. Certainly in a decisive way, winning it, right, in a clear, decisive way that the Americans are victorious.
Right. And I think the thing we should point out to that extent is World War II was the last time this country participated in a war before it became a very progressive bureaucratic nation.
That's right. I mean, it's really interesting when you look at that timeline of progressivism emerges in the latter part of the 19th century after the Civil War, the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s. And then as you move through the 20th century, the United States in many ways is becoming increasingly progressive. The government is becoming increasingly progressive. It's creating progressive bureaus. Our culture is becoming increasingly progressive. Progressivism is spreading throughout our schools, our universities in the course of the 20th century. And that's precisely when the United States engagement in foreign policy, including war. War is a form of foreign policy. We start to change how we conduct it and what the results are. I want to remind our listeners here. I mean, think of what war meant for the Americans. The American people were people you did not want to trifle with. You didn't want to mess with. The British learned this lesson, right? We were this young, scrappy, small band of colonies that becomes a new nation, and George Washington and the Continental Army took on the greatest military on the face of the planet. And here's one huge advantage that Washington had. Washington had in his mind a very clear definition of victory. He knew what victory, how victory was defined, and what it meant, what it would look like. And that definition was when the British military, that includes the British regulars, the redcoats, the army, and the British Navy, those huge warships, when they pack up their things and leave, that's victory. At that point, the people in North America, the Americans, they are free to do whatever they want. They can form a new nation. They can write a new constitution, right? That is what victory meant. And he accomplished it. The British did pack up their things, get on their ships, and sailed back across the ocean. And there's victory. Another example, the Civil War. Lincoln had in his mind a very clear definition of what victory meant. And this is one of the things Lincoln fought throughout the Civil War with his own generals, because his own generals didn't fully understand what the goal was, what victory meant. For Lincoln, victory meant nothing more than unconditional surrender and a dismantlement of the Confederate Army. There could be no Confederate army left in the field. That would be victory.
Right.
And he achieved that at great expense over the course of 4 years. The same was true in World War I and World War II, right? We end these wars with the enemies surrendering, unconditional, it's over. Then you get into the Korea and Vietnam period. This is when the Defense Department, first of all, there used to not be a Defense Department. There used to be a Department of War that was really only active and engaged during an actual war. The Department of Defense is a very different kind of thing. It's a permanent bureaucracy. It's meant to be there and be active, and a bunch of highly paid experts are there whether we're at war or not. It's the Department of Defense. I mean, it's really telling, just that little change in label, right? The difference between a Department of War versus a Department of Defense. And as the Department of Defense became bureaucratized, became increasingly progressive, these experts they send increasing numbers of American soldiers over to faraway places with no clear definition of what victory means. I mean, I'll give you just one example of this. Look at all the treasure and blood and sacrifice and time that we have spent in Afghanistan. And as recently as the last 6 months, our own Department of Defense, what they thought was really important was to create critical race studies programs in Afghanistan and gender study, go promote gender studies programs in Afghani universities. Right? What did those things have to do with American victory, right? Securing peace for Americans, protecting the rights of American citizens. It has nothing to do with any kind of victory in that sense.
You put something, there was something we talked about extensively when putting the case study together. And that was sort of the change in having a standing army and a standing military now versus the founders' ideas of that. And I think we kept a little bit of that in the case study, and that'll be something interesting for people to talk about. But as you're talking about Afghanistan, and I'm thinking about the early days of the Republic, there's a really interesting point in all that. The founders' original idea was we have militias, right? That was a normal part of life in the late 1700s, early 1800s. You have militias. These people are constantly training. They're ready to go. Their interest is in defending the country, and they're willing to step up and do so when called upon. At the same time, we rarely sent significant.
Right.
We weren't going to send an army or a full navy over to Britain to go fight the war, right? You said it yourself. Both the Revolution and the War of 1812, it was the British Navy and the British Army coming over, and it was our militias fighting back. The one war that happened in between that I've always had a fascination for was the war with the Barbary pirates on the shores of Tripoli. If anybody knows the Marine song, right? That was the first foreign war that the United States participated in. And what was really interesting about that, we had a standing navy because that was what the Constitution prescribed, and we had this small group of Marines, and the naval ships took the Marines over. But we didn't fight this with Americans. We went over and we recruited mercenaries on their land, and we recruited people who had a vested interest in ending the terror that the Barbary pirates were forcing upon the world. I don't know how many people know what was going on, but the Barbary pirates were basically capturing as many ships as they possibly could. They were stealing the gold off of the ship. So if a ship went from Britain down to Italy with wool to sell, they would go sell it. They would take the gold. The gold would go back on the ships. The Barbary pirates would come in. They'd capture the ship. They'd take the gold, and they'd hold the people on the ship prisoner to the king. And they would call the King of England and say, if you want your ship and your people back, we want X amount of dollars. And they were doing that to us as well. But there was an interest in the people over there. We had the same thing in Afghanistan. The difference is they weren't fighting the war. We were over there, and we were fighting for them. We were keeping security. We were keeping the peace. And we saw what happens when you go in and you take care of them. We talked about this in last week's podcast. When you go in and you take care of them for 20 years, they stop thinking they have to take care of themselves.
Yeah, it incentivizes dependency. In the same way, every domestic welfare program incentivizes dependency.
So the result ends up being when we leave, it took hours for a small group of Taliban to overthrow 300,000 Afghan soldiers because they didn't care. They didn't have any skin in the game at that point. I mean, they probably cared, but they didn't have the capability or the training to actually go forward and defend their own country.
And Dave, you just put your finger on something really important as we think about this, the transformation, the progressive transformation of the Department of Defense, and how we think about how we conduct foreign policy and military engagements and these sort of things. The difference of incentives. Those experts in the Department of Defense, even if you give credit to their own claims, they're the experts. They've been studying, international relations. Okay, maybe you have. What is your incentive?
Right.
What is the incentive of the Department of Defense? The Department of Defense, it has its own interests. I mean, this should be no surprise. Think of progressives all the time. We'll say, well, you can't trust a business. You can't trust a product or a new medicine or something that a business puts out because a business has its own interests. A business wants to make a profit, right? Yep. And they'll lie to you. They'll cheat you. They're not going to tell you the truth. You can't trust a business. That's what progressives tell us about organizations in the form of a business. Well, how about an organization in the form of a government? How about an organization like the Department of Defense? Does it have incentives? Yeah, it has incentives. It would like more resources, right? More power, more money.
Right.
How does it get those things? The Department of Defense, like any government agency, it gets more money, more resources, more power by failing to accomplish its jobs. It goes and says, hey, look, if only we had more money, if only we had more resources and more people, then we could actually achieve the goals that you want us to achieve. In the meantime, the Department of Defense, as an institution, as an organization, and I want to emphasize here, I'm talking about the organizational incentives of within the Department of Defense.
Right.
Its interest is to go find wars, make wars, get involved in things, get involved in entanglements and conflicts and possibly wars all over the world, because then the Department of Defense becomes important. The Department of Defense can go to Congress and say, we want more, we need more money, we need more resources. Ordinary citizens don't think that way. Ordinary citizens, the kind of citizens who participate in a militia, they don't go looking around the world for fights to pick and wars, right, to drag on. And they avoid it at all costs, and they only participate in conflict. They only go actually fight as part of a militia if it is the absolute last resort, right, and their own defense relies on it. Then they're going to fight. And once ordinary citizens start fighting, you better bet your bottom dollar they're going to find any way they can to win quickly, so that they can go back home. They don't want to keep doing that. And so the incentive of a big progressive bureaucratic organization like the Department of Defense is very, very different than the interests of ordinary citizens.
I think a lot of people talk about the things Trump learned through his 4 years, right? When Trump first came into office, we knew there was going to be a learning curve. There was going to be a not necessarily a learning curve in the traditional sense, but in how are people actually going to work? Who can he trust? What is the actual incentives of people around him? And I think one of the things we saw Trump learn very clearly over his 4 years and see his opinions change about who he surrounded himself with was just that. I think the early people he put into his national security posts, his Department of Defense posts, he realized very quickly, these are people who want to go to war. That's right. All they know. They are looking to secure their job. And you heard him several times saying, I got rid of this person because all he wanted to do was go fight. I mean, look, that was the foundational fight between John Bolton and Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. John Bolton wanted to go to war, and Mattis wanted to go to war, and Trump said, no, that's not what my presidency is about.
And I just want to add, I mean, and it's not, war is the big subject. I mean, you're right to identify that. And it also includes all these ancillary, very secondary subjects. You know, many of the bureaucrats in the defense world and the intelligence world too, they want to go to war. They have an incentive to go to war, but they also want to do things like just go meddle in other right. They want to do things like say, here, yes, you need the United States Defense Department to come sponsor women's studies program in your university and whiteness awareness clinics, and right, and you need these things. and so, you know, whether it's the Defense Department, the State Department, the intelligence community, they have deep institutional interests in meddling with other countries, what people do and how they live in other places. And so this kind of brings us back to this big theme of prudence or practical wisdom. And, you know, we can ask the question, was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, was that done prudently? Was that an exercise in practical wisdom? I don't know of anybody. I don't even know any Democrats right now who will say, yeah, that was really well thought out and well planned out. And that's the way, I mean, come on, when you're watching images of desperate people holding on to gigantic transport jets taking off and falling hundreds or thousands of feet to their death. I mean, it was absolutely terrible. And it's still terrible there's still people stuck as we record right now. You know, if you're listening to this, imagine what this is like to have spent some huge chunk of your life in Afghanistan, whether you're a U.S. citizen or not. You're there in Afghanistan, not a very pleasant place to live, but you've invested 5, 10, 15, 20 years helping the United States government, helping Americans, and all of a sudden you're stuck. You're hiding in, the closet in your apartment or your house. You're hoping not to get caught. There's only one way out. It's the airport. And what the Taliban has done, they know. They know the roads that lead to the airport, and they've put up blockades and barriers. You can't get to the airport. And what is that like? I mean, it's got to be terrible. It's got to be miserable. And that debacle points to a topic that we want our members, we want all Americans, but especially members of the Vino Veritas Society, to become increasingly familiar with and good at, which is the art of prudence, the practical wisdom.
Right.
And here's what we mean by that. And here I'm gonna draw upon one of my favorite thinkers, Aristotle. I'm in my office now, so he's right back there on the bookshelf. If I need some help from him, I can go pick it up.
Sure.
Aristotle explains that there are different kinds of wisdom. Prudence is not the highest wisdom, or it's not wisdom of the highest ultimate things. That is a kind of first philosophy. Think of what theologians study, right? Someone who studies the ultimate first principles of existence, of the world, people who ask questions like, what is God? Or what is the purpose of life? Or is there meaning in the universe? Those are sort of the highest, ultimate subjects. Prudence is wisdom about practical matter. Aristotle says it's wisdom. Sure. It's wisdom connected to action. We need to take an action. So what action should we take, or how should we do it? An example I like to think of, imagine some people out on a camping trip. Things start to go bad, and they need to get out of there. They get lost, and someone's hurt or someone's sick, right? What do you do? And one person says, well, we should follow the course of the river. And the other person says, no, I think we should climb over that mountain. Someone else says, no, we should just hunker down here and wait. Let's build a shelter. There's no clear, obvious answer. They all agree the principle is we want to live. Life is good and we want to live. We don't want to die. That's the principle. Prudence is the practical application of the principle. Okay, we all agree we don't want to die. What's the best thing to do? What's the wisest course of action? What is most likely to preserve our lives and avoid death? There's no textbook you can open up and look in and say, oh, well, here's the answer right here, right? It really all depends on the details of the circumstance. Maybe following the river is the wisest course, unless someone in your party has a broken leg. Well, if someone has a broken leg, they probably can't follow the course of the river, right? So you got to take into account all the details. I'll give one of my favorite examples. Abraham Lincoln addressed the subject of prudence, and he used the example that, remember, he grows up on the dusty frontier, and this example would have been familiar to everybody living out there, first in rural Indiana and then in Illinois. It's a deadly venomous rattlesnake. Rattlesnakes are bad for human health and even human life, right? If you get bitten by a rattlesnake, yes, you can really be hurt badly. You might even die. I mean, it's a serious thing to get bitten by a rattlesnake.
There's a reason Ben Franklin used it in so many symbols, yes, in the days leading up to, yes, the founding.
And Lincoln says, okay, we all agree, right? Rattlesnake bites are bad for human health and human life. But the prudential question is, what do you do with a rattlesnake? What's the right course of action? And then Lincoln poses a couple of very different circumstances. He says, imagine in one circumstance, you come across a rattlesnake out on the middle of the prairie. And so you find a big stick and you whack the snake and you kill it. And people thank you because, they might have come across the snake and it might have bitten them. So they're like, thank you for whacking the snake and killing it. We really appreciate that. You saved us from the snake. But now imagine in a different circumstance, you discover that the rattlesnake has crawled into a crib where there's a sleeping baby. The rattlesnake's in there with the baby.
Yeah.
Do you get a big stick and whack it? First of all, you might hit the baby, right? You might actually hurt the baby. Or you might agitate the snake to the point where the snake bites the baby. Lincoln's point is simply this: how you deal with the snake that's next to a sleeping baby is very different than how you deal with a snake out in the middle of a field. That's prudence. That is the exercise, the practical application. Take a principle and then apply it to a particular situation. And it can be really challenging. We at the Vino Veritas Society, right, we have distilled down the core principles of liberty, of free society, of human flourishing and happiness to 6 precepts and 4 civic virtues, the virtues that are required to be a good citizen of the United States. And it takes some work to really understand what those precepts are, what they mean, really master them so that you can talk about them and teach them to others, as well as the virtues. And then it's almost more difficult. It's a great challenge to figure out, okay, what do we do with that? And I'm going to use Afghanistan and the whole war on terror as an example. One of our precepts is the proper purpose of government. The purpose of government is to protect the individual natural rights of all citizens. That's its proper purpose.
Right.
The prudential question is how? How should government protect those rights? Now, we look at Afghanistan. I mean, why are we in Afghanistan? Why does any American care about Afghanistan? And the reason is 9/11. And it's sort of, this is really, really relevant because we're now just days away from the 20th anniversary, September 11th, 2001. We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And that's why we're in Afghanistan. And I bet most of our listeners, not all, I happen to know we're actually attracting some younger listeners, which is wonderful. But I bet most of our listeners are old enough to remember
absolutely
precisely where they were on 9/11 and what they were doing. It's one of those days where, right, if you were a teenager or older, you remember every detail about that day, and you remember the moment you found out what happened. And there's a famous scene. It's all over on YouTube and other places. The president of the United States at that time was George W. Bush, and he was down. I think he was in Florida, and he was with some school children.
I think it was a kindergarten or first grade class, and he was reading to them.
I mean, he has a bunch of little kids around him, right? And he's on a little chair, and he's reading a book, and it's great. He's down there promoting,
no Left Behind
literacy and things like this.
Yeah,
okay,
which could be a whole other podcast.
Yes, yeah. We can exactly. Thank you for saying that. Exactly. But the point is, he's there with some little kids, and one of his aides leans over and tells him after the second attack, after the first attack, when the first plane hit the first tower.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what was going on. I mean, it seemed like an accident, some weird malfunction. Did an airplane just accidentally hit a skyscraper? I mean, that's bizarre. And then when the second plane hit, the whole world knew this is deliberate. We are under attack. What's going to come next? Nobody knew. And that aide leans down and whispers in President Bush's ear, "Sir, we're under attack. We got to go." And so all of us as citizens, we should think through this question. Okay, we agree with the proper purpose of government. We all agree government should protect the rights of Americans. And at that moment, that terrible morning of September 11th, 2001, Americans were being vaporized. They were being blown up by airplanes. Airplanes were turned into missiles, into bombs. And we're smashing into buildings and killing, murdering large numbers of people. All right, well, the purpose of government is to protect the rights of Americans. Their rights aren't being protected. Their rights are being violated in terrible ways, lethal ways. What should the government do? I want each of you listening to this, I want you to imagine you were President Bush at that moment. You're sitting there in that little school room with some little kids. You're reading your book. One of your aides turns to you and whispers in your ear and says, "Mr. President, we're under attack. American cities have already been attacked, and Americans have already died. What do you do?" You get up. You go get in your car. Maybe you get on an airplane. You might think about attacking someone. You might think, I got to call up some fighters, call some jets. Do you launch a nuke? Do you send a missile somewhere? If so, where do you send it? No, right? I mean, here's the thing about prudence. This is what makes prudence so challenging. It connects knowledge of the first principles, like the proper purpose of government. That's a first principle. Government should always protect the rights of citizens. It connects the principle with the particulars of a situation. And knowing all the particulars is sometimes impossible. Like that morning of 9/11, the question on everybody's mind, including the president. The president was asking this question: who's attacking us? Who? If we want to stop them from doing this more, who is them? Who are they? It wasn't clear at all to anybody because unlike famous moments in war, right? In a big open declared war against a foreign government, where think of Pearl Harbor, we mentioned that in our case study as well. I mean, it's Japanese aircraft with the Japanese flag painted on it. Like you knew, okay, these are Japanese pilots flying Japanese planes, all of which were a function of the Japanese government. Okay, so it's Japan. It's the government of Japan that's attacking us. At least we know who we're dealing with. On 9/11, that wasn't at all clear.
It's still not clear. I mean, let's not forget there are still lawsuits, and there's a whole conversation here too. But there are still lawsuits today happening against the Saudi government by citizens of the United States suing the Saudi government for their role in 9/11. But we never attacked Saudi Arabia. We did go and attack Iraq. We went and fought part of this war with Afghanistan, right? Started in Iraq. We still have troops in Iraq. We're pulling out of Afghanistan right now.
Yep.
But we still have troops in Baghdad and in Iraq. And part of this, I mean, there are so many legs to this because it wasn't a country that attacked us.
That's right. And it can get even, I mean, I'm going to just float out some sort of hypotheticals because I want our members to engage in this kind of prudential reasoning. And one of the big themes here I want to try to get across, we want to get across, is it's hard work. It's work. And there's no obvious, easy, you can't just pull up your iPhone and ask Siri, how should I respond to this attack? Or what do I do in this situation, right? There is no objectively right, clear answer that is beyond dispute and beyond question. No, every answer, there are situations in life where every viable answer is plagued by challenges and questions and disputes. One of the things I used to tell students in the classroom when introducing the idea of politics is I would say, when you have two options and one option is really good and one option is really bad, that's a pretty easy choice to make. You choose the really good option, right? But what happens when all the options are bad? None are good. And I mean, one way to approach that is say, well, if all the options are bad, at least pick the lesser of the evil. Okay. What if it's not clear which of the evils is lesser? They're all just really bad in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you're 100% right, and I'm gonna keep pushing that. Sometimes what seems like the obvious lesser evil, we don't see the dominoes that affect from it, right? And sometimes there what appears to be a very obvious, this is a better solution than X is a better solution than Y, and maybe 1 degree removed from the decision, it is. But when you get 5 or 10 or 20 degrees removed from that solution and you see what the dominoes are, Y might have been the better solution. And all of a
Dave,
sudden,
I'm gonna
go ahead.
I'm gonna offer a really concrete, very relevant example of what you just said. The 2020 election. I promise you, right now as we speak, there are millions of progressives across the country who on election day last year, November of 2020, what they said, millions of them, they said, yeah, Joe Biden's pretty bad. There are a lot of progressive Democrats were not happy with Joe Biden. Yep. They didn't want Biden to be their party's nominee. So they said, yeah, he's one of the evils, but he's a much lesser evil than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has tweeted these mean, terrible things. He's been caught on video saying mean, ugly things. Nothing can be worse than that. That is the worst evil imaginable.
Yeah.
Someone saying something ugly about women, that's the worst evil. So we're going to go with Joe Biden because he's the lesser of the evil. And I think we're seeing just within a few months of his administration, they probably were wrong. It doesn't make Donald Trump great. Yep. Right? It doesn't absolve Donald Trump from all the wrongs that he's done. It's just that was probably not a very good calculation of prudential reasoning on the part of progressives who said, we think Joe Biden is the lesser evil. We're seeing all the bad things going on in this administration. It's very arguable. No, actually, Trump was probably the lesser of those evils.
I want to go back. We're coming up on our hour, and I want to touch on something you said 15 minutes ago. When you were talking, you started to bring up some of our precepts, and you talked about proper purpose of government. There's another one, and I go back to my original, what I said earlier about the comparison of the battle at Tripoli versus Afghanistan, right? Where at the Battle of Tripoli, we went over there and we used their soldiers. We helped guide their soldiers to a victory, as opposed to Afghanistan, where we've been doing that. And a lot of this just comes down to the pure mentality of the progressive state. You said it earlier. The mentality of progressives is you're not good enough. You're not smart enough. No one else has the capability to take care of you but me. And we have this domestically. We see this in our welfare system. We see this in every part of our lives. I mean, this attitude, Colorado, Denver specifically, San Francisco, New York, we have these atrocious homelessness problems. And the progressives don't look at them and say, with a little bit of help, you're capable of getting off your feet. They look at it and they say, these people are helpless. They have no choice. They're never going to be anything but homeless. So we just have to make sure they're comfortable. And there's cities that are actually setting up paid for homeless camps that are costing taxpayers something like $70,000 or $100,000 per tent. But that same application, and I use that because I want to show there's the same application to international policy, to foreign affairs, right? In the 1801, the Battle at Tripoli, we went in there saying we're going to trust the people on the ground there that we can help them win this battle against the Barbary pirates. But in Afghanistan, we never showed any trust in the people. We didn't train them well. We had a progressive attitude. We went in and said, you need us to take care of you because you're not capable of taking care of yourself. And that's why they lost this. And it speaks right to another one of our precepts, the idea of mutual civic trust. Can you trust other citizens, other individuals, even if they don't live in this country, to take care of themselves? And the progressives say no. They say that you have to be educated in a certain way and connected in a certain way and think in a certain way if you're going to be trustworthy. And all of those people only exist in the government.
Right. You're absolutely right about this. That idea of mutual civic trust, right, is a question on both ends for both parties. One, can you trust someone? Can you extend trust to someone else? Can you offer trust? And then the other party in that, right? The question is, do they warrant trust? Is it wise to trust them? Have they demonstrated that they're trustworthy? And citizens who are serious and wise and who really want to be free, they're thinking about both ends all the time. They want to trust their fellow citizens, and at the same time, they try to demonstrate that they themselves are trustworthy. Other people should be able to trust them. In a way that sounds so kind of mundane or trivial, and yet it's huge. It's the basis of free society. If you don't have that, if you have citizens who don't trust, say, millions of people say, I don't trust anybody who owns property or runs a business, or they're going to lie to me and hurt me, and they're going to try to sell me poison labeled as medicine. I don't trust them at all. Those kinds of people are the ones who reach for government oversight. Come watch over our interactions, what we do, and we want government to regulate and control every aspect of our lives. And you're absolutely right. That was the spirit. I mean, one of the great ironies in Afghanistan, we had bureaucrats in the United States government, leadership, bureaucratic leaders within the Department of Defense, who don't understand the United States Constitution, who don't respect the United States Constitution. We're in Afghanistan trying to teach Afghanis how to write a constitution. I mean, it's laughable if the results weren't so terrible and weren't so sad. And I want to bring this back to our members, our listeners, our subscribers. Well, go ahead.
Before you move on to that, I think you were just right on something really, really important. And that was, you've often said this, that trust is never something that can actually be earned. It's up to everybody's discretion. They have to sit and decide how much do I have to get to know somebody? What do I have to see from somebody before I'm willing to gift them my trust?
I love to describe trust as a gift. I think that's the right way to think about it. No one can make me trust them. They can't make me, right? I can always choose just not to trust someone. At the same time, I cannot make anyone trust me. I can do my best to be trustworthy, to demonstrate, I'm worthy of trusting, but I can't make somebody trust me. That's a choice each person makes.
Some people choose to gift trust right at the beginning. They get to know somebody. They maybe get introduced to them by somebody else that they trust, and now they trust each other. Other people like to wait and see and get to know somebody a little bit better on their own before they gift them their trust. And the level of trust obviously is a sliding scale. We all know that there is something that changes in a relationship and inside of the other person when you do gift them trust. So when we look at the Afghanistan situation, and if you look at how our Department of Defense and different bureaucratic agencies took that on, if they went in and they never showed any trust or any faith in the Afghani people to be able to write a constitution, to be able to learn how to defend themselves. And I've seen so many interviews with so many soldiers who were over there who said they never gave them any time to actually train anybody. The training was very minimal. And the only reason that would be is because they never trusted the Afghani people to actually learn how to defend themselves. They never trusted them to actually be able to create a constitution and understand natural rights and understand how a country can exist with private property and everything else. Instead, they just said, no, you guys are just a desert nomadic type people. You're never going to be safe. We have to just do this for you. And without giving them that trust, they never incentivized them. They never gave them the sense that, okay, maybe we can learn this.
Those bureaucrats basically said, you Afghanis are children, and we're here as your parents.
Yeah.
We're going to tell you what to do and provide for you and protect you, right? And why did they do that? Because that's what bureaucrats do. That's what bureaucrats do. Bureaucrats aren't in the business of trust. They're not in the business of extending trust to others, and they're not in the business of warranting trust themselves. When, I don't know, OSHA shows up, an OSHA bureaucrat regulator shows up at your business, he's not there because he trusts you. He's there precisely for the opposite reason. He's there because he doesn't trust you. It's why they exist. It's why the progressive bureaucratic regulatory state exists, because the progressive class of bureaucrats and experts, they don't trust you. They don't trust the Afghanis. They don't trust anybody who's not part of them. And even then, a lot of times you find interagency disputes that they don't trust each other. So progressivism is built on suspicion. It's infused with suspicion. It's infused with distrust. The ultimate. I'm trying to think of an analogy here, and the one that's coming to my mind, and there's probably some way better, more modern examples. Remember the old in Superman, the comic strips and the movies. What was the green rock that was just lethal to him? Kryptonite. Right?
Kryptonite.
The kryptonite for progressivism is mutual trust among citizens. It literally just melts progressivism away, because citizens who trust each other and are worthy of it, they don't need a big administrative regulatory subsidy state. I mean, it's sort of fascinating when you think about our precepts and our virtues. That precept of mutual civic trust, that is the precept that ties together all the precepts with the virtues, because it's unwise to trust people who are not trustworthy. I mean, we're not saying that. We're not saying just go offer trust to everybody you meet. No, if someone is, unscrupulous, duplicitous, untrustworthy, who wants to hurt you, don't trust that person. We're not saying trust everybody. We're saying be worthy of trusting as a citizen. Be worthy of trusting. Well, how do you do that? You exercise the four virtues. You're self-assertive, you're self-restrained, you are self-reliant. You're not walking around begging and demanding things from other people. And you understand, you have some civic knowledge. You understand that the basis of your freedom, your rights, is the same as the basis of the freedom and rights of all your fellow citizens. That's a citizen you feel pretty comfortable trusting.
Absolutely. So you were gonna offer a challenge or something final to our members as we come up on our end.
I want to connect this to our members, to every citizen of the United States, to be self-governing, to be a self-governing citizen of a constitutional republic means each of us, in our own way, we are kind of a citizen legislator. Now, it's true, we don't actually vote on laws unless you're in Congress or you're in the state legislature. We don't directly vote on laws, although even that's not entirely true, because occasionally we have initiatives on our ballots. And so sometimes we do directly vote on laws. Typically, most laws are passed by representatives. Nonetheless, we are electing the representatives who then go and elect or vote on the laws. And so we are, directly or indirectly, we are citizen legislators. Legislation is, in certain ways, legislation is the structured method of exercising prudence. Right? It's structured. There's a structure in there. There's a way to introduce a bill and debate the merits of it. Right? There's a process for a bill becoming a law, and along the way, it's a structured way to engage in prudence. Is this law likely to lead to the kind of results that we're looking for, or the opposite? Or is it going to create all kinds of new problems? And what this means is, if we expect to be self-governing and free, we must exercise prudence. We don't have a choice. Once we become mere minions, once we become mere followers who just nod our heads and repeat whatever our leaders tell us to repeat and do what our leaders tell us to do, we're no longer self-governing. Self-governing means exercising prudence. And prudence, I want to repeat, it's a great challenge. It's not easy because there's no obvious, simple answer. There is no textbook. Any prudential question depends greatly on the details of the situation you find yourself in. And so I want our members to look at our chapter meetings and our case studies as opportunities to practice that virtue of prudence. Think about the precepts and the virtues. Think about the particular problem you're trying to solve. Maybe in the case of 9/11, the problem is keeping America safe from foreign attacks. There's the problem. How do you do that? Or maybe it's things more. Maybe it's things like there's a virus floating around, and nobody wants to get sick, and we don't want others to get sick. How do we protect ourselves? What's the best way? What's the role of government in that? These are prudential questions, and members of the Vino Veritas Society should be better than anyone. They should be more experienced than anyone else at that exercise of prudence, because they get to do it every month.
Yep. And I hope I hope they do it in their chapters every month. I hope they're also getting together or having conversations or discussing through the internet with each other. How are you communicating and how are you practicing prudence? Because every single day of our lives, those opportunities to exercise prudence comes up, and it's just like anything else. Exercise and practice is how you get better at it.
You've used the example, Dave, in the past of an athlete and the whole idea of muscle memory, right? You got to practice at something. You don't just wake up one day and someone just tells you, here's how to hit home runs, and then you go out and hit home runs. No, you got to practice over and over and over for years. And prudence is the same way. Practice it. And here's a couple of, speaking of prudence and practical wisdom, here's some really practical tips. When you are thinking through a prudential subject, trying to figure out what is the right thing to do in this circumstance right here, right now, come up with reasons. Back up when you come to your conclusion, think of the reasons why, and present those reasons to the people you're around and talking to, because that gives them something to chew on, right? If you just assert something, if you say, well, here's the right course of answer, we should do this, period. That kind of leaves others wanting. They're like, well, why should we do that, right? Provide some. If you say, well, here are 10 important reasons why we should do X, then that makes X much more persuasive. Here's the other piece. Humble yourself a little bit as you think through and you come to your conclusion and you think through your reasons and you present them to others. Invite challenges. Ask people, say, here's what I think we should do. And here's why. Here are the reasons. Am I missing something? Is there a better argument? Is there a better conclusion? Did I miss something? Did I make a mistake in my reasoning? Give me a critique. Give me a serious opinion, some feedback here.
Right.
In that sense, humble yourself and invite others to offer, a different perspective or supply something that maybe you missed. And that, when it's done in the right spirit, two people who actually know each other, trust each other, care about each other, and they truly are trying to figure out the best course of action. And they are engaged in that constructive, critical kind of discussion where each is making an argument and each is critiquing the arguments of the other. It can be one of the most enlightening experiences in life.
It's how we move human beings forward. None of us are perfect. The old Aristotle dichotomy of God or angel versus beast. None of us are perfect. We're human beings, and the only way we get better is to use reason and practice and talk to each other and learn. And that's how we improve. And that's in a lot of ways how the United States came into being.
And the way to do that, Dave, is we need some Veritas, and we usually need a little vino too.
I've got the vino clearly, so I will continue to bring that to the table. I think we've made the point, and I hope our members enjoyed this month's case study. I hope if they're looking for more, they've taken some time to watch this podcast and get some benefit from it. And I hope we did okay being outside of the studio today. Looking forward to some feedback from everybody.
this has been a huge challenge because usually we get to just look at each other, and I don't get to see your big, your big smiling face. I'm just looking at a camera, so I don't really know what this is going to look like in video form.
Well, we've got a great producer. He'll take care of us. And until then, I will just continue to be the guardian.
Till next time.